Our theme today is about money, how it works, and why it doesn't. A topical theme because we live in an age where everything is valued in terms of its price. There were equally cyclic other ages in which things were valued for knowledge, or people were valued for heroism, courage, or chivalry, or even people were valued because of skillful mastery of their craft. But these ages change, and we are at a time when it's the age of finance. And yet, every age has an end. And in many ways, we can say we are reaching the end of the financial cycle. And very soon, and already the first signs are seen, the age shifts to valuing other things. And there's a reason for that. Because the epitome of the financial age, when all is valued by money alone, is the sign that it is the end. The end of the money cycle is when the money value is exaggerated to its most. As they say, night is darkest before dawn, but the same principle applies in other fields. And I want to share with you a deeper perspective of the working of money power so that we understand what it is that we are dealing with, whether in the present condition of its exaggeration or in its right condition and right use, which should always remain with us. To elucidate certain principles, I'll begin with a story. A hypothetical story, piece of fiction. Imagine that Bill Gates comes on a visit to the Andaman and Nicobar Islands. As he lands there is a small tremor of an earthquake. The satellite link is cut off, and when he goes to pay his hotel bills, he discovers that his credit card does not work. At that point, the hotel keeper says, "Sir, you have to pay." And Bill Gates finds he is unable to pay. I ask you this question now: what has happened to this almost richest man in the world? Where is his wealth at that time? You'll say, well, the money is still there in the banks, but the connection to the money has been cut off. Let's take the story a little further. Around the same time, the newly released version of Windows crashes. And all the banks which held his money find their computers with zero. And although the link is re-established through the satellites, his account, when he swipes his card, his account shows zero. What has happened to this richest man? Where did his wealth go? You may say, well, it was just a question of zeros and ones inside a computer, but he still owns his empire. And so he can pay by credit. He can say, I will go back and send you in some form some wealth. But let's consider a hypothetical scene where the hotel keeper says, you must leave. Bill Gates goes hiking deep into the forest, and at that point comes on the way to a panwala shop and says, on the edge of the forest, not yet gone in, and says, can I have some water? He pulls out his credit card. The panwala says, that's a piece of plastic. Give me real money, hard cash. Bill Gates pulls out a 10-rupee note, gets his water. But as he goes deeper into the forest, he comes to a point where there is no panwala shop, there are no roads, and he's surrounded by one of the old indigenous tribes. and he asks to meet the chief of the tribe. The chief, in their discussion, asks for something to be paid, and Bill Gates pulls out his 100-rupee note, and the chief says, "That's a piece of paper. I only take hard cash." So Bill Gates asks, "What is hard cash?" The chief digs into his bag and pulls out 100 seashells. "That's hard cash," he says. "That's the value system for money." Bill Gates says, "I'm sorry, I have nothing." The rich man suddenly is the poorest, and he has no access to any wealth. But our story goes a little further. In vain, he tries to give different objects. It doesn't work. Finally, he gives up and tells the chief, "You are a great chief of this tribe. I come to you as a guest, and I ask for your refuge." The chief says, "By the most ancient traditions of India, I accept you as an aspect of God, and here you will be given all the luxuries that we can offer you." And Bill is lavished with all the luxuries. At that point, he has the most caring, loving people surrounding him, giving him the best of objects, and he has to pay nothing. At this point, isn't he the world's richest man truly? The story has many different elements, and they are all meant to highlight the fact that money itself is not real wealth. Whether it's a piece of plastic, whether it is the rupee note or coin, or the seashell as your token of currency, the currency is not the wealth or money. The currency is a token. And the real wealth can often come in a form which is invisible, currency-less. In fact, if you look at a typical rupee note, 100 or 500 or whatever the currency, it says on this piece of paper, "I promise to pay the bearer the sum of 500 rupees, signed Governor of the Reserve Bank of India." It says here, "guaranteed by the central government." What does this mean? This piece of paper is not money. It's a token of money. It's not wealth. If you really want 500 rupees, you should give this paper back to the Governor of the Reserve Bank of India, and he will give you the real 500. This is an IOU. It's a piece of paper, a promissory note that says you will be given 500 if you go to the Reserve Bank. But most of us don't. We exchange IOUs, we exchange pieces of paper representing the money held there. What if the Reserve Bank doesn't have money? What if they are bankrupt? So it says here, guaranteed by the government of India. That's an additional promise over the promise to give you the maximum sense of security that you will get what you want. Suppose we go to the Governor of Reserve Bank and say, "I want my 500 rupees. What will he give you? Seashells? What can he give that actually represents the real 500 rupees? He still has to give you back another token. Maybe he gives you gold. But gold is not the money either. It's another token. If you think about it, ultimately, you're always playing with tokens. You never really handle money. You can't. Because real money is not a physical object. All physical objects are valued as tokens but are not the money itself. So what is the real money? Real money is a notional value. It's not physical, it's non-existent. Like mathematical numbers, they exist in your mind. Physically, you always have objects, you don't have numbers. You can't hold a number. You can hold a number of objects, but they're objects, not the number. And it's the same with money. Here we come to the beginning of our deeper understanding of wealth. Sri Aurobindo points out that money in its origin is a divine power. In its expression, it is a vital power, a power of the pranic life energy, and operates on that level. Physical objects are only tokens, symbols of that vital power. And here we get our first clue of the nature of money. It's non-physical, yes, but it is fundamentally of a vital nature. Life energy, prana. And life energy is what dynamizes physical things. If the life force withdraws, your body collapses. If your life force increases, you feel young, strong, fresh, active, dynamic. You can do so much more. All physical objects are sustained by the life force behind it. And it is the same with the money token. The currency token is sustained by the life force supporting it as a power. Now, this life force, real money, can be seen. As you know, there are people who are able to see life force. They see the aura around you, they see other things. If you were able to see money power as an actual power, it has a certain color. Goldenish red, golden reddish in tint, and it can flow. It can flow from one place to another like life energy. When somebody heals you with pranic healing, Reiki, or any of the other methods, he's transferring life force from himself into you. That's what boosts your life energy and your body heals itself. So just as life force can transfer from one body to another, the life force can accumulate in a place. When you go near the beach, on the top of the mountain, you feel fresh and rejuvenated because there's more life force there. In the same way, money power also flows, and it can flow from one location to another. It can flow from one person to another. Just as a location can hold it, a person can hold it. And if a person holds money power, then its tokens, that is the currency notes, gold, and other symbols of money power, automatically are attracted to the person. Now you can see how the material processes of wealth reflect the vital life force that money power represents. If you can bring in that power, the material processes follow. If that power withdraws, the material processes also fritter away. There's a saying in the business community that the first generation works hard to build the financial empire. The second generation enjoys it. The third generation wastes it. And you have seen this, maybe you're seeing a lot of example of this around, but there's a truth to it. And the truth is that unless you develop in yourself the capacity to hold this power, it fades from you. The fact that you have money in the bank account does not mean it will stay with you. If the power withdraws, the physical tokens will withdraw. And it is those who built it at first who had that power to pull money and to hold it. Those who didn't have it, they fritter it away. Inevitably, even if they try not to, it will fade away. Now there are examples of people you would have known who make very little effort and they seem to attract all kinds of opportunities of wealth. There are others who try so hard. They try to take every opportunity in every way possible, and yet they somehow can't hold it. It does not come to them. And then there's another type. They seem to get a lot of wealth coming in, but it goes out as quickly as it comes. They can't keep it. There's an interesting anecdote of a person on seeing whose horoscope the astrologer said, "Oh, this man, he will handle lots of money." So the parents were very happy, and soon when the person took to his responsibilities, he became a bank cash teller. He was handling lots of money, but he never owned it. And you see here a representation of this truth, that if you cannot contain the money power, it can flow through you, but it's through you and leaves no imprint on you. The power itself of wealth can be sensed. There are people whose presence seems to carry that glow of money. And there are those who seem to carry the inversion of that, which I may call only as the lack of it, as if an aura of poverty. And it's a fact. Such a person entering that space or taking that responsibility, money power goes away. Therefore, there is in our Indian tradition a special value given to those who have the capacity to hold money power. And we see not only money power as a vital energy, but we see behind it the divine source from which that vital energy comes. Being essentially of the grade of energy, it is also conscious, just as life force is a grade of consciousness. Perhaps not an elevated grade, but nevertheless a conscious power. And therefore, money power as a vital force also is conscious. But in its source, in its divine origin, it is superconscious. To that superconscious source, we give a name and a form because she is conscious. In the traditions, we normally refer to her as Lakshmi. But why do we call her she and not he? Again, it is a deep occult truth that in the symbolism of the divine consciousness, the consciousness that presides is described always in the masculine gender. The consciousness that is dynamized and manifests, we describe with the feminine gender, he and she. But we also understand that it is always the same consciousness. When it leans back in its vast base of support, as a witness and support and enjoyer, it is he. When he pours out in the dynamic action of creation and flow, he is she. But it is the same consciousness. So always Lakshmi accompanies Vishnu. It is his power of action, of dynamization. It is she standing back in support that is Vishnu. No significant distinction except in its operative aspect. But this Lakshmi as a superconscious power can be invoked, can be called, because as a conscious power she responds. And when she is called, she comes, but she does not stay unless she feels comfortable. So there are conditions that please her and conditions which repel her. Generally speaking, any circumstance of beauty, harmony, order are comfortable to her and attract her. Circumstances of ugliness, chaos, and disorder repel her and she goes away. Often, if you observe the environment in which people work, you get a sense, will the money power stay or will she be repelled? I can assure you, if you are repelled, certainly Lakshmi won't stay. To create the right kind of circumstance of beauty, harmony, and order, not only materially, even more important, psychologically. You may hire people to clean the place, to decorate it, but if those who work and live there have a chaotic energy, chaotic mind, tense heart, full of anger and hatred and confusion, Lakshmi cannot stay. Because the psychological environment is even more real than the physical. She manifesting through the psychological vital energy and being herself a spiritual energy. So necessarily one has to create an attractive climate of these three characteristics that appeal to her: physically, psychologically, and even spiritually. But at the very least, if we can create the right psychological climate, she is attracted. There are naturally people who by temperament tend to have an affinity with this force. I remember long ago, there was a couple from the business community, very senior, aged. They used to come to visit my teacher, my spiritual preceptor, MP Pandit. And after meeting him, after they left, once he commented, "You see the lady, she's the one who holds the money power." The man was doing the business. The lady was a homemaker. She was looking after the children, the house, the family. But he said, she's the one who holds the money power. And it was interesting to see over the years, after she passed away, the family fell into misfortune financially. There was nobody else in that family who had the capacity to hold that power. But as a person who held that power, nobody was conscious of the crucial role that she played. Perhaps she herself may not have known, at least superficially, though deep inside she may have sensed it. It is a natural affinity that many women have more easily than men to this power of wealth. And that is why traditionally we speak of the Lakshmi of the house. The woman of the house is respected as an embodiment of that Lakshmi power. Of course, there is a necessary inner preparation and requirement, but there must also be the respect from the family to what she embodies or can embody in order to assist this containment of that power. To move further in our discussion, the money power as a conscious force has further requirements. It's good if she feels comfortable in this circumstance, but then she also demands certain things from us. And there are several characteristics. The first is that when she is called and she comes, if she chooses to stay, she tests you. She creates a situation where a little money comes. And at that point, she is waiting to see how you handle it. If you utilize it properly, she is happy and some more comes. And again, she watches. And if you utilize it properly, some more comes. And it keeps growing in cyclic rhythms until either you cannot contain it and she stops there, or it goes on growing until it acquires other forms and she is happy and stays. What is the right use? And there are many ways of describing it. The right use of money involves its utilization for the largest benefit, to put it most generally. It can include that you use it for yourself, for your comfort, for your home, for your enjoyment, for others' enjoyment. All of these are acceptable. It's not a question of morality. Very often we think a right use of money is when I give it away for the benefit of X, Y. When I don't use it for myself. That's not necessarily the right use. The right use is when it is put into use that it grows to the maximum benefit of all. Now the all may even be limited to your family, but still it must benefit all. When it is so used, it thrives and it increases. And you see here the symbol traditionally, this thriving movement we associate with certain grains of rice or wheat, where a single grain planted blooms and bursts out into hundreds of grains. That's the movement of growth of money power that she enjoys. Second, she, like any other power of the life force, grows by flowing. If you hold the money, lock it up in a box, then she withers. If you channel the money in flow, it grows. And this is the reason why you will find that those who hoard money very quickly lose and fall into poverty. Whereas those who apply it, utilize it, invest it, whatever word we use, so that it circulates, tend always to receive more. So we understand this principle, the flow goes out and comes back, and goes out and comes back. And this brings us to another principle, that money naturally grows in rhythms and two phases, the flowing out and the returning. And the psychological attitude for each is different. When the money flows out, she wants to flow largely, generously. When the money flow returns, she wants to be valued and cherished down to the smallest detail. Now here is the mentality of the accountant, that he is worried why this 1 paisa is not matching. You might say, why are you being so picky? Just round it off somewhere. He says, no, I must get my books exactly balanced. This attitude of cherishing every tiny piece and taking it in, she enjoys that because she is valued. On the other hand, when giving out, she must flow generously, flow freely, not being hampered and bound, otherwise she can't flow. So there's like a throwing out and then a return, like a rebounding force, doubled, and again a throwing out and a doubled rebound. But if you apply it the other way, if while throwing out you become penny wise, then it sticks and does not build the momentum of the flow. If in receiving you become generous and say it doesn't matter if it doesn't come back, then again you lose the rhythm. So you see how it's a double attitude, generosity and stinginess, but in the right rhythm, in the right context. If you're stingy in both, it doesn't grow. If you're generous in both, it doesn't grow. So it requires a kind of a psychological training and a particular relation with the money power that allows you to flow with her, play with her. And this brings us to, perhaps I can give an analogy here. The need for flowing out and in is very similar like the life force when we breathe. You have to breathe out and you have to breathe in. If you hold your breath, you suffocate. If you blow out and hold your breath, you still suffocate. You have to go through the cycle. This brings us to one more aspect of this power. She wants to be cherished. She wants to be enjoyed. And here we come to a crucial problem, particularly in the present context. Unfortunately, over the years, we have learned to associate money power with guilt. I have seen many businessmen, having made their fortunes, they may still comment, one day I want to be free of all these attachments. I don't want to have anything to do with money. Money is not good. I am polluted. And that's a false understanding. Money is not a negative power. Money is not a polluting power. Money, remember, in its origin is a divine force and must be cherished as a divine power. The reason why India fell into poverty during colonial rule, in its extreme, but it had already started before that. The reason why India fell into poverty is because somewhere along the way, we rejected money as unspiritual. We rejected power as unspiritual. But both of these are distortions. Power corrupts, they say. Yes, surely. But even knowledge can corrupt, even skill can corrupt. Anything in excess beyond your capacity to hold, patrata, we say. If you do not have the right competence, it can corrupt, surely. Why only blame money or power? Surely these also can corrupt when wrongly used. So the correction for us should be right use, not wrong use, not rejection of money. But during a certain phase, which we may call the ascetic phase of Indian spirituality, we labeled money and power as undivine. And we must contrast it with the earlier phase of values in India, where we cherished money as one of 4 aspects of the divine manifestation. The first aspect of the divine manifestation is Maheshwari, vastness and knowledge, wisdom. The second aspect is Mahakali, the tremendous power and force of dynamism by which this knowledge is expressed in life, overcoming obstacles, breaking opposition and resistance. Third is Mahalakshmi, plenitude, fullness, opulence, of which money power is an aspect. And the fourth is Mahasaraswati, perfection, beauty, down to the most fine detail, mastery of all skills. And always in India, under the inspiration of this Vedic vision, it was the complete manifestation of all 4 aspects that we saw as the divinization of life. Somewhere along the way, about 2000 years ago, there was a turn, perhaps triggered by an extreme opulence, that a teaching came forth that said, but be careful, don't get lost in this richness and opulence of life. There is a greater truth from which all this comes, and there was a kind of an excessive correction to turn away from life towards that, abandoning life for an otherworldly spirituality. When in fact the Vedic spirituality is that of manifesting in life and transforming, divinizing life. The turn away from life came, and gradually from that point, knowledge weakened, strength weakened, wealth weakened, and skill faded. The result was eventually India fell under attack, eventually colonial rule and poverty. This is the result of having rejected wealth and power. So there is a correction necessary today, and the correction is to recognize wealth and power as divine essentially, and to reconquer these, to bring them back in their right relation to life. You will see, towards the end of India's freedom struggle, we had begun to associate goodness with poverty and weakness. There was even in the extreme the idea that if a person is poor and weak, then he is more spiritual. And if a person is rich, he is unspiritual. And you see this idea then further seeping into society and represented in the cinemas of the age, in which the rich man is always a crook and the good man is always poor and remains weak always. That's why he is good. But you can see how perverse this is, because Mahalakshmi and Mahakali are divine. Poverty is not spiritual, is not divine. But there's a practical difficulty. As you see, money or power can corrupt when wrongly used. And we must recognize what is the right use. And the right use in this case is to recognize them first as a divine power given to us, and we as trustees of that. To say, I own this money, and to put it in your pocket and say, it's mine, that's where the error comes. To say, this is a divine gift given to me for right use, that's the right attitude. And then we can handle even large sums of money or quantum of power without the associated distortion that comes when the ego claims it and the corruption that follows. So this is the correction that is necessary, which allows us then to disengage from the idea that money is unspiritual and the guilt that comes with it. So I started this discussion by saying we must get free of the guilt, because Mahalakshmi wants to be enjoyed. wealth must be utilized and enjoyed. The enjoyment does not mean personal satisfaction of the moment's desire. It means enjoyment in the flow and opulence of the benefit of growth, whether in a small group or a larger group, but the sense of growth in which everybody grows and is enriched. That enjoyment of that flow. These being the psychological requirements for applying money, you can see how money can be, the utilization of money and the right relation to money can become a sadhana in itself. And there are those of you who will find yourself in circumstances, in families, where the use of money, the application of money is preeminent. You may not always be handling the actual physical currency, but you can still participate in the creation of wealth as somebody who embodies that power and relates to her rightly. Even if you are a homemaker, or if you are a businesswoman, or whatever the form of your activity, this key role can still be yours to play. And if it does not matter whether it is recognized by others or not, the benefit of that opulence spreads around all. We are entering a certain phase of human evolution in which certain characteristics associated with the divine Shakti are acquiring greater prominence in human life. Necessarily, the feminine gender in humanity, who has a natural affinity to those characteristics, will begin to play an increasingly more important role. For a long time, women have been bound, and the power of that Shakti has been kept suppressed. And there is a kind of a tilt and even the possibility of a reversal of that balance in the emerging days and times to come. As conscious embodiments of that divine Shakti, you can play a crucial role in this awakening. When we look at a still wider domain of the utilization of money in human society, we observe that humanity, being obsessed with the currency and not the power behind, has created structures over structures over structures, by which the forms of currency have been inflated. And I will briefly touch upon this in relation to my earlier statement that the era of predominance of money is coming to an end. You will find long ago, when you made a payment with money, the token which you used itself had a real value. You have heard of the good old days when they paid in silver coins, gold coins, or copper coins. If you did not have money, the coin itself, the material of which it was made, had value. You could melt gold, it was valuable. You could go from one kingdom into another, although it had a different imprint on gold, the weight of the gold was still valued. You could go across civilizations, gold was still valued. But sometime in the last century, this actual value of the token was disconnected, and the paper currency was brought in circulation. The reason it was done was there was not enough gold. By printing paper money, you could pretend as if you had more than you have. And whenever the government runs in debts, it prints some more paper, not always backed with real gold. The moment you start printing paper, you are creating more tokens than the value behind. And then you have what is called inflation. Prices automatically increase to match the actual value. the common man becomes poorer. Those who print the money, paper money, become richer, and there is an increasing disparity. More interestingly, they invented further layers of manipulation. It's a game of smoke screens, actually, mirrors, hall of mirrors, creating the illusion of many people when actually there's one person but there are many mirrors. So another layer of mirroring was added in the stock market. When the token was further converted, the value of a company was further converted into a different paper, whose value represented what the market might be 5 years hence. So somebody starts a company and declares 5 years from now we will be 10 times bigger. So the value of the paper becomes 10 times larger in anticipation of what will happen 5 years hence. And again you have papers describing values which are inflated 10 times over but do not represent the actuality of today. Then those papers were packaged and sold in further bundlings, and a whole chain created of layers upon layers until today in the hyperinflated market, for example, if you buy shares in a company, the share is already 10 times overvalued from what the company is, and you might have to wait 5 to 6 years before that value catches up with what you've already paid. What happens if meanwhile there is an economic downturn? It's just paper, you get back to zero. Even more complex, machinery was invented, much of it in the USA, where loans which could not be paid back were packaged into little boxes, and the box painted over white, euphemistically speaking, and sold as products of value, because it's a debt which someone has to pay back. It doesn't matter if they can't pay back, someone will eventually pay back, and that's sold. And those bundles are repackaged and sold again and sold again and sold again. The last person, it's a game of musical chairs, the last person held holding the box, when the music stops, he loses it all. The people in between make a little bit of money passing it on. So we are in a very interesting era where the quantum of paper money in the world is about 6 times more than the quantum of actual valued money. I won't even say paper, I'm using a wrong term. The quantum of this virtual, hypothetical money is more than 6 times the value of the paper printed money. And the paper printed money is already much more than the actual value of things. What this means is, out in the global market, if you make a speculative play and make the markets dip a little in the virtual money, which doesn't exist, it's all notional, not even on paper, it's all notional. You make that fluctuate by 15%, there is enough fluctuation to wipe out the real currency circulating in the world, wipe out clean. The entire value of the stock market in India can be wiped clean by 15% fluctuation in global virtual money. Something of this happened in the US briefly last year. It was a little blip, but you can see the ripples it created all over the world, because that has become the center of all the virtual money in the world. But that was a first blip. A blip of a system, a pack of cards piled up, house of cards as they say, which is still present as a house of cards. One day it has to collapse. When all that virtual money collapses to real paper money, and real paper money is exposed for the actual worth that it represents, there will be a deflation of a scale of perhaps 100 to 1. It may happen gradually over years, it may happen in a sudden drop, we cannot say. Those who understand the complexity of money flows, and most of us don't, those who understand have already prepared for it, are already preparing for it. But I leave this to you only as an indication of how we have created a whole pretense, a drama, and nobody wants to stop it. Because the consequences of the collapse would be so great, nobody can anticipate what it will be. But from a larger perspective, from an evolutionary perspective, it's inevitable. I would even say it's necessary. Because it's more useful that we play with real values than we play with hypothetical, invisible, unreal falsehoods. This transition will take us through a passage of confusion, perhaps they expect 5 years, to a new monetary system eventually. As in the past, so it might be in the future one day, that the way you value a person will change. It will not be how many numbers you have in the bank. It may be what the person really carries with him. What's the real worth of a person? Look at yourself, look at those around you, look at your family members and friends. Consider what they are like first as human beings. Consider the wealth of knowledge that they may have, the wealth of an inner strength by which they are able to move through life, the opulence that they spread, the happiness that they spread, the skills that they have to share in life. This is the real value, and you can never convert it into a number. It's multi-dimensional and not numeric. As we begin to view people once again in realistic terms, human society will undergo a shift. And once again, we will value each other the way we should always have been doing. As one large family, in which each person is unique and unreplaceable and brings something which nobody else brings. But each one is incomplete alone. Together, we are the most complete expression of the human potential. Together, we can learn and enrich each other and grow together as one large family. This is the direction in which things have to move. It's a question of how much time, but it will happen. This being the nature of the larger financial transition and its social implications, we come back to our first story. The value of money and the ability to contain and hold it, to invoke it, to view money power first as a divine power and to flow with it in right relation, and to enjoy that flow and to share that flow in a larger opulence. This is something each one of us can do in our lives in detail. Some of us spend time every day in conscious prayer, and there are different relationships one can have with the divine to whom we pray. And one of the relationships is to give oneself to the divine in a conscious surrender, but also to ask the divine to fill us with the knowledge, with the strength, with the wealth and the skill that we have to manifest in the world on His behalf, manifesting that divinity, to help us to grow in the fullness that we can be in all four sides of our complete expression. And we can consciously ask for that. Because in fact, in our essence, each one of us, as a divine presence, as a divine soul, as a part of the one divine, is meant to manifest fully that fullness of that divine consciousness. We can ask for that and consciously let our life be full of that and spread that vibration in all those with whom we interact, in all activities that we share with others. With this broad picture, I will pause and invite your questions. We have about 5 minutes. Now, you may invest in paper. There are bonds. You put it in the government bond, it stays locked up in government coffers. They print a little extra paper to pay you back. It has not created growth. If you invest in the secondary market, the investment is not helping the company to grow and do more work. It's just a trading process in the musical chairs. Somebody loses money while another makes money. It's not growth. But when you invest in a way that will lead to growth, that's when it is useful. And that's what we call the primary market, where a starting entity uses the funds to develop its resources. In contrast, the secondary market is speculation, it's gambling. Somebody loses so that another may win, and nobody gains in the final count. But the investment which leads to actual growth and development of resources, that is worthwhile as an investment. That will always remain even in the future as a frame of working. Yes. There's a mic.
Somewhere in the lecture we had mentioned that when money naturally grows in rhythms, flowing out and returning. So when money flows out, you have to be magnanimous, and when it comes in, you have to be very, very stingy. So could you just give an example? Like what I could get is that when supposing you're handling, like, the auto wala takes 10 rupees, so you'll be stingy in getting the 1 rupee back. But when you're giving gifts, you have to be more, can you just explain it a little bit more?
When you are spending to invest, let's look at that first. Suppose you are an entrepreneur. You're putting together a certain framework. And perhaps spending a little more gets you an equipment that is superior. But you say, no, I'm going to be stingy here. I'm going to save a few rupees. And in the long run, it leads to other problems. But when you're spending to buy, a similar process may exist, but you have to keep the balance of it. You can buy furniture that is functional. You can spend a little more and buy furniture that is beautiful. Now, depending on your value system, you may say, for me, beauty is important. And although you're spending a little more, what you are left with is an environment that you can come to and feel the beauty of that space, which actually helps the not only money, power, opulence of all aspects of life to grow. So that's it's a question of balance. You can, of course, spend 10 times more and get something which is nouveau, but quite ugly. Unfortunately, things which are fashionable are not always beautiful. So that's why the final decision will come from a certain feel, a sensitiveness in your heart, where you feel, yes, this is worth it. Yes, at the back.
Spending money sometimes is mixed up with wastefulness.
Yes.
And surely wastefulness is very sinful.
Yes. Yes. When we waste money, Mahalakshmi withdraws. She wants to be utilized rightly to grow. That's the reference I had mentioned earlier. So what's the difference between wasteful expenditure and useful expenditure? Does it lead to growth? Now there are families I have seen where whatever money comes goes into what they call essentials. But if you observe the pattern of the essentials, there is a lot which leads to no real value in quality of life. It's just there because that's how it was done, or somebody is addicted to spending more for certain materials and it's wasted there. So the principle of what is wasteful and what is useful comes only by seeing whether it leads to greater growth, greater fullness. Yes, certainly to waste is wrong. I won't use the word sinful, but it makes Lakshmi withdraw. She doesn't like to be wasted. Someone else? Yeah.
How do we derive the real value of gold in today's circumstances?
the real value. You see, when you go back to fundamentals, the real value is always in the eye of the beholder. You may bring a kilo of gold, the king says, I have plenty of that. I'd rather have a kilo of a very beautiful painting. That I don't have. But for the poor man, the kilo of gold represents food and security for so many years. It's always in the eye of the beholder. And if you see the ancient systems of finance, it was largely based not only on barter, but where there was currency of gold in this way, it had different values in different places. And if we, as we will inevitably move to a similar system in future, it will always be based on the value of the perceiver. The problem which you are asking for comes because we are thinking, what's the resale value? Then I'm worried about what others think. And when we are all worried about what each other think, we must create a common standard of value. That becomes the exchange rate. But if we don't care what others think, then it has no worry. Yes.
You have said in your lecture that money is a divine power and it's consistently flowing. What worries me is that India has 80% on the poverty line.
Yes.
Can you suggest any few concrete measures where money can flow to the poor and make
Yes.
our country into one of the most one of the most internationally recognized countries, and our currency should replace the dollar?
Yes. I'm glad you said that. I also believe such a thing will happen because the US dollar is about to collapse. It is backed by 30-year paper bonds. China produce to the USA. For the dollars it gets, it gives it back to the US government to buy 20 and 30-year bonds. In other words, the US government says, I'll pay you back after 20 years. And China puts the money back so that it can circulate, so that the US can buy its products. In other words, the shopkeeper, seller, the producer is giving money to the buyer so that he may buy from him. And it's reached such a point that the amount of US dollar in circulation is backed by nothing at all in real goods in the USA. 95% of the goods sold in the USA are produced in China, not locally. The entire capacity of local industry to produce in the US has been killed. So if the flow from China stops, the entire nation will fall into chaos of material goods. So it's a very precarious situation. The US dollar is inevitably going to fall. The Indian rupee, on the contrary, is artificially being held weak by the government policy to promote exports. The result is an increasing disparity. You find a college dropout gets more than an engineer who has spent 10 years to develop his skills by going to a BPO where he has to speak with an American accent. That's his only skill. But he earns twice or three times as much as an engineer who has developed real skills for the moment. As long as we tie our economy to the US, wherever the dollar inflow comes, there is a hyper exaggeration of apparent virtual money. But if you cut that out and look at real values within the Indian economy, you will find India already is one of the wealthiest countries because all our currency is backed by real goods, real manufacture, and real hard work. But the reason for poverty in India is because unequal distribution of the currency tokens for that real hard work. This has several reasons. One of them is systemic. When the British left us, they left behind a system of administration which we call the Indian government, which was designed for exploitation, not governance. So in those days, the most powerful local government representative was called the collector, because his job was to collect taxes. And after the British left, the Indian politicians replaced but left the structure the same, you still have the collector collecting, not serving. He is not a servant, he is a collector. And your relationship with the government is still one of fear. The government's relationship with you is still one of dominance, leeching the common man to sustain this huge monolith which does very little, does not serve people in any case. So there's this whole unbalanced structure, outdated, which must be broken and rebuilt. Rebuilt in terms of the needs of the Indian people for right governance. How it will happen is a painful transition. Even our constitution is similarly, peculiarly made. It has had many crises, needs to be reformed in terms of our need. The whole political system is out of date for our needs. But that's a bigger question. I won't go into that more. Just to say, in terms of actual wealth, India already is one of the world's richest. But because the world's wealth is measured in US dollars and the rupee is kept weak against the dollar, so it looks like we are 50 times less wealthy than we actually are. This is one of the tricks of the Hall of Mirrors. The day the US dollar collapses, the real wealth of India will suddenly pop up. Yes.
What is a
Yes. Yes, please.
what is
I
a
think-
waste? Who decides what is a waste? For me, a business class or economic class. For somebody, it could be a waste. For somebody, it could be an opulence, peace of mind. So how do you decide that?
Yes.
The question isn't lady.
Yes. The question you've asked with regard to waste is actually a question regarding comfort. Is paying for your comfort a wasteful exercise or not? And that depends on the person and the circumstance. You cannot give a general answer. There are situations in which the travel in comfort is more important. If you come on the other side tired, the work you have to do will not be done. There are other situations when perhaps you can put up with certain types of discomfort because you will save on petrol or other things. But the principle I would put is this way. Suffering and ugliness are both undivine. If you can afford it, to make it more comfortable, to make it more beautiful, is always better. If you can afford it. When you cannot, it's possible to make it as comfortable or as beautiful as possible without spending much. It just needs attention. I give you a reference here. Which are the spaces in the country that we consider the most sacred? Your temples, churches, mosques, whatever. Why is it that very often these are also the filthiest? And I leave you this question to introspect. Why is it that the temples are often the filthiest? Although you respect the deity, you don't value the environment around because we have made ourselves insensitive to beauty. And to make a place beautiful takes very little effort. It only takes attention, a little effort, a sensitivity. The moment you're sensitive, you cannot put up with ugliness. Doesn't need money, takes a little work. You go to a gurdwara, it's always clean, spick and span. There is a commitment to making it clean and beautiful. Cleanliness alone is not enough. You must bring in beauty. That's when Mahalakshmi is attracted. And I'll put it this way. In many places in India, poverty is still rampant because the circumstance of beauty, harmony, order have not been taken care of. I'll leave you with an incident which took place actually near Pondicherry. After the tsunami, there was large-scale destruction. Some of my colleagues had gone out to try to help the fishermen who had been hit. They went with packages to give to them, food, clothing. They came to a certain village. all the fishermen were sitting out of their houses, playing cards and smoking. So they went into the houses of the fishermen, found it full of filth from the tsunami, the dirt that had been washed in. And this was 2 weeks after the event. For 2 weeks they had allowed the dirt to remain. They were happy to sit playing cards and smoke. Didn't feel it uncomfortable to see that dirt, didn't clean it, did not try to make it beautiful. As long as we stick to this kind of an insensitivity and accept ugliness, Mahalakshmi does not come into that space. Yes, earlier I said there are limitations to the system, but psychologically this is the greater limitation. Wealth will not come where there is ugliness. This is a correction we have to make in the collective consciousness all over India, all over the world, but this is our domain of responsibility. As people become sensitive to beauty and harmony and create that space, the wealth will come. India has for more than 5,000 years been one of the wealthiest civilizations in the whole world. The poverty we see is only of the last 200 years. And she is destined to become wealthy again because that has been the aspiration of this civilization, for a comprehensive divinization of life. So here we are looking at the deeper psycho-spiritual principles behind the growth and increase of wealth. Understanding it and practicing it in our own lives, we can assist this to spread all over the country and make India once again splendorous, opulent, and wealthy in every way. Namaste.